Hello, and welcome, replaced only by the soft crackle of a warm fire and the echoes of a story from long ago. Settle in, let the warmth seep into your bones, and the gentle rhythm of the flames soothe your mind, left behind by events that defy easy explanation. This is true crime for sleep, a place where the unsettling becomes a gentle hum, a question to ponder as you drift into dreams. Our story tonight takes us out onto the vast, unforgiving expanse of the open ocean. The sea, as any mariner will tell you, is a world unto itself. It is a place of breathtaking beauty and terrifying power, a realm that holds its secrets close. It can be a gentle cradle, rocking a ship with a lulling rhythm, or it can be a ravenous beast, swallowing vessels whole without a trace. But our story is about something perhaps even more unsettling. A ship found perfectly intact, sailing silently under a fair sky with no one, not a single soul at the helm. This is the story of the Mary Celeste, the most famous ghost ship in maritime history. We must, first, understand the ship itself, for the vessel we know as the Mary Celeste was not born with that name. It was christened the Amazon when it first slid from the slipway at Spencer's Island, Nova Scotia, in 1861. It was a brigantine, a two-masted ship, sturdy and well-crafted, a product of the proud shipbuilding tradition of the Canadian Maritimes. At 103 feet long, it was not a colossal vessel, but a workhorse of the sea. But from its very inception, a shadow of misfortune seemed to cling to its timbers. Its maiden voyage was marked by tragedy. Its first captain, Robert McClellan, fell suddenly ill just days into the journey and died. It was a somber beginning, an ill omen that sailors, a notoriously superstitious lot, would have noted with grim concern. It collided with a fishing boat in the English Channel. It was once driven ashore in a storm, requiring extensive and costly repairs. It seemed that the ship, for all its sturdy construction, was what sailors called a hard luck vessel. An unlucky ship, after a decade of these troubled voyages under various owners, stain of its past misfortunes. It was registered under the American flag and christened the Mary Celeste. Our attention to the man who would command the Mary Celeste on its final, fateful journey. Captain Benjamin Briggs was the very model of a 19th century sea captain. Born in Massachusetts to a seafaring family, the ocean was in his blood. By all accounts, he was a man of impeccable character, a devout Christian, who did not allow alcohol on his ship for the crew, and a fair, respected leader. He was not a reckless man, nor was he prone to panic. He was 37 years old, a seasoned mariner with years of experience navigating the treacherous North Atlantic. He was also a proud part owner of the Mary Celeste itself, having invested his life savings into the vessel. This was not just a job for him. In the autumn of 1872, Captain Briggs was preparing for a voyage from New York to Genoa, Italy. Denatured alcohol is not a beverage. For this voyage, Captain Briggs made a decision that would forever add a layer of deep poignancy to the mystery. He decided to bring his wife, Sarah Elizabeth Cobb Briggs. With him, Sarah was a beloved figure, known for her grace and piety. The thought of a long sea voyage with her husband likely seemed a grand adventure, a chance to be together. Little Sophia, their second child, would have her second birthday on the open sea. They also had a 7-year-old son, Arthur, who was deemed old enough for school but too young for such a long and arduous journey. He was left behind in the care of his grandmother in Marion, Massachusetts. Imagine that parting on the docks of New York, a young boy waving goodbye to his father. This single, heartbreaking fact transforms the story from a simple maritime puzzle into a profound human tragedy. The crew selected by Captain Briggs was small but competent. The first mate was Albert C. Richardson, a man who was also an investor in the ship and was considered by Briggs to be his equal in skill and temperament. The cook, Edward William Head, and 4 general seamen, 2 German brothers named Volkert and Bas Lorenzen, Arian Martins, and Gottlieb Gutschall, rounded out the crew. They were all experienced sailors, mostly Northern Europeans, known for their discipline and skill. There was no evidence of any discord or animosity among them before they set sail. 7th, 1872. The Mary Celeste cast off its lines from Pier 50 on the East River in New York City. The weather was typical for a late autumn day on the Atlantic coast Chile, with the promise of harsh conditions to come. But the ship was sound, the crew was able, and the captain was one of the best. As the shores of America receded, Captain Briggs would have settled into the familiar rhythm of the sea. His wife, Sarah, likely passed the time reading or sewing in their cabin, perhaps tending to the ship's harmonium, a small pump organ she had brought aboard to bring a touch of home to the lonely ocean. Little Sophia would have been a cherished presence on the deck, her laughter a stark contrast to the groan of the ship's timbers and the whistle of the wind in the rigging. For over a week, the journey seemed to proceed without incident. We know this from the ship's logbook, which would later be found. The entries are routine, professional. They note the ship's position, the weather conditions, the wind direction. The final entry was made at 5 a.m. on November 25th. It noted the ship's position as being just off the Azores. It noted fair weather. There was no hint of distress, no mention of any trouble. And then the log falls silent. Let us leave the silent Mary Celeste for a moment and travel across the waves to another ship, a vessel whose destiny was about to become forever entwined with our mystery. This ship was the Dei Gratia, another brigantine which had left New York just 8 days after the Mary Celeste, also bound for the Mediterranean. Not strangers, they were friends. Some accounts even say they had dinner together in New York the night before Briggs set sail. On the afternoon of and the coast of Portugal, the lookout on the Dei Gratia spotted a ship. It was about 6 miles off their port bow, and something about it was immediately wrong. The helmsman, John Johnson, noted that the vessel was yawing, drifting erratically. Its sails were set, but they were in a state of disarray. Some were torn, flapping uselessly in the wind, while others were properly set, catching the breeze and pushing the ship forward, but with no one guiding its course. It was moving like a blind giant, aimlessly and clumsily. Captain Morehouse, observing the ship through his spyglass, felt a growing sense of unease. He recognized the distinctive rigging of a brigantine. As the Dei Gratia drew closer, he tried to hail the vessel, but his calls were met with an unnerving silence. No one appeared on deck. No flag was flying. The ship just drifted, a silent, solitary shape on the vast, empty canvas of the ocean. For 2 hours, the Dei Gratia shadowed the mysterious vessel. The unease on board grew into a palpable dread. Finally, Captain Morehouse was close enough to read the name on its stern. the Mary Celeste. Something was terribly, horribly wrong. Morehouse ordered his first mate, Oliver Devoe, and 2 other seamen to launch a small boat and board the silent ship. Imagine that journey across the churning water. The short distance between the 2 ships must have felt like a mile. The slap of the waves against their small boat, the creak of the oars, and ahead of them, the looming, quiet hull of the Mary Celeste. As they drew alongside, the silence was profound. No voices, no footsteps, no sounds of a working crew. Only the groan of the ship's timbers, the snap of a torn sail in the wind, and the endless whisper of the sea. First Mate Devoe was the first to climb aboard. He swung himself over the rail and landed on the main deck. He would later describe the feeling of that moment. The deck was wet, thoroughly soaked, as if waves had been washing over it. But the ship itself was not in immediate peril. He called out, "Is there anybody here?" His voice was swallowed by the silence. He and his men began a slow, methodical search of the vessel, their footsteps echoing on the empty decks, and what they found, or rather what they didn't find, would become the foundation of one of the greatest mysteries of the sea. Let us walk with them in our minds through this ghost ship. The ship was, as Captain Morehouse had observed, under sail. The rigging was a mess, with some ropes broken and dangling, but the main sails were set and drawing wind. The ship was seaworthy. It was not taking on a catastrophic amount of water. In the forward hatch, they found the hold. The cargo of 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol was almost entirely intact and in good order. There was about 3.5 feet of water in the hold, which might sound like a lot, but for a wooden ship of that size and era, it was not considered a critical or alarming amount. The ship's pumps were in working order and could have easily cleared it. So, the ship was not sinking. They moved from the stark, open deck to the enclosed, even more eerie cabins below. They entered the crew's quarters. The seamen's chests were there, neatly stowed. Their oilskin boots and pipes lay where they had been left. Crucially, their money and personal valuables were untouched. This immediately cast serious doubt on the theory of piracy. Pirates would have ransacked the quarters and taken anything of value. Here, everything was in its place, as if the crew had simply vanished in the middle of their daily routines. Next, they entered the galley, the ship's kitchen. The stove was cold, but the pantry was well stocked. There were ample provisions, food, and fresh water for at least 6 months. There were no signs of a fire or a struggle. It was simply a kitchen, waiting for a cook who would never return. The most chilling discoveries were made in the captain's cabin. Here, the signs of a recently abandoned life were heartbreakingly vivid. Captain Briggs's desk was in order. Ship's papers were neatly filed. On a small table, they found his wife's sewing machine, its lid open, with a small piece of a child's clothing still under the needle, the work unfinished. Nearby, a child's toys were scattered on a bunk, as if little Sophia had just been playing. There, Captain Briggs's clothes were folded in his locker. Everything was tidy. Everything was normal, except for the profound, overwhelming absence of the people who lived there. On the captain's desk lay the ship's logbook. First Mate Devoe picked it up and read the last entry. As we know, it was dated November 25th at 5 a.m., 10 days prior to the discovery. The ship's slate, used for temporary notes, had an entry from 8 a.m. that same morning, noting the ship had reached the island of St. Mary in the Azores. The entry was routine, no mention of storms, pirates, or any trouble whatsoever. It was as if, at some point on that clear weather day, the entire human element of the ship was simply erased. But there were things missing, and these missing items are perhaps the most important clues in the entire puzzle. The ship's single lifeboat, a small yawl that was normally stowed on the main hatch, was gone. The davits from which it would have been launched were intact, but the boat itself was missing. This strongly suggested that the ship had been deliberately and intentionally abandoned. The captain and his crew had left in the lifeboat, but why? Why would a veteran captain like Benjamin Briggs order his crew and his own family into a small, fragile lifeboat in the middle of the Atlantic, abandoning a ship that was perfectly sound and seaworthy? The Mary Celeste was a far safer place to be than a tiny, open boat. Also missing were the ship's chronometer, a vital instrument for calculating longitude, and the captain's sextant and navigation book. These were the essential tools of navigation. Without them, a ship was lost. The fact that they were taken along with the lifeboat reinforces the idea of an orderly, planned evacuation. It was not a panicked flight. It was a conscious decision to leave the ship and take the means of navigation with them. One other detail, often sensationalized over the years, was the discovery of a sword in Captain Briggs's cabin. It was found lying on his bunk, and early reports from the salvage hearing described it as having stains that looked like blood. This bloody sword became a lurid centerpiece for many of the more violent theories about what happened. However, later, more sober analysis concluded that the stains were almost certainly just rust, a common affliction for any piece of metal on the damp, salty air of a sea voyage. There were no other signs of violence anywhere on the ship. No bloodstains. On the deck, no signs of a struggle. Just an abandoned sword slowly corroding in the sea air. So, this was the scene that greeted the men from the Dei Gratia. A perfectly sound ship, fully provisioned, its valuable cargo untouched. A vessel sailing on its own, its human occupants gone without a trace, having apparently left in an orderly fashion in a small lifeboat for no discernible reason. They had taken their navigational instruments, but left behind their money, their clothing, and all their other possessions. They had even left behind the logbook, the official record of their journey. Captain Morehouse faced a difficult decision. Leaving a skeleton crew to sail the Mary Celeste to their destination in Gibraltar was a risky maneuver, as it would leave his own ship, the Dei Gratia, undermanned. But the laws of maritime salvage meant that bringing the ship to port would entitle him and his crew to a significant share of the value of the ship and its cargo. It was a fortune. He made the decision. First Mate DeVoe and 2 other men were left on the Mary Celeste, and the 2 ships, the Rescuer and the Ghost, set a course for Gibraltar. For the next 2 weeks, the men on the Mary Celeste endured a grueling voyage. The ship, they discovered, was difficult to handle. It sailed strangely, and they felt a constant, eerie sense of being watched. But they were sailors, and they did their duty. They brought the silent ship into the harbor at Gibraltar just before Christmas, 1872. The arrival of the unmanned Mary Celeste created an immediate sensation. The story was baffling, a puzzle with no logical solution. The Vice Admiralty Court convened a salvage hearing, not just to determine the payment for Captain Morehouse and his crew, but to investigate the cause of the abandonment. And it was here, in the cold, formal setting of a courtroom, that the mystery deepened, and the first dark theories began to take shape. The authorities, led by the Attorney General of Gibraltar, a man named Frederick Sollyflood, were deeply suspicious. He simply could not accept that Captain Briggs would abandon his ship for no reason. Foul play, he insisted, must be involved. Here, in the middle of the ocean, the story of the people of the Mary Celeste ends, and its legend begins. The arrival of the Mary Celeste in Gibraltar set in motion a chain of events that would do more to obscure the truth than to reveal it. The official inquiry was headed by a man named Frederick Sollyflood, the Attorney General for Gibraltar, and the Queen's proctor in the Vice Admiralty Court. Sollyflood was a man of immense confidence, and as it would turn out, immense and unyielding suspicion. From the very beginning, he was utterly convinced that a terrible crime had been committed. The idea that a seasoned captain like Benjamin Briggs would abandon a perfectly sound ship for any natural reason was, to him, an absurdity. He dismissed it out of hand. In his mind, the silence of the Mary Celeste was not the sound of mystery, but the sound of murder. His investigation was less a search for truth and more a search for confirmation of his own dark theories. He seized upon every small detail that could be twisted to fit a narrative of violence and deceit. He fixated on the sword found in Captain Briggs's cabin, though it was almost certainly just rusted from the damp sea air. Sollyflood declared the spots to be bloodstains, a clear sign of a violent struggle. He ordered parts of the ship's deck rail to be cut out and sent to London for analysis, claiming they bore deep cuts made by a sharp axe, evidence, he said, of a bloody fight, though no expert could confirm his claims, and the marks were more likely the routine scuffs and scars of a working vessel. Sollyflood presented them as proof positive of a massacre. He also found what he believed to be traces of blood on the deck, though again, these were never scientifically verified and could have been anything from rust to wine stains to simple discolorations in the wood. He was a man seeing ghosts where there were only shadows, and his authority gave these phantoms a terrifying weight. Sollyflood developed to primary, competing theories. His first and most cherished target was Captain David Morehouse and the crew of the Dei Gratia. He found the entire story of their discovery far too convenient. Two ships, leaving the same port just days apart, their captains known to each other, meeting by chance in the vast emptiness of the Atlantic. It struck him as impossible. He theorized that Morehouse and his men, driven by greed for the lucrative salvage reward, had conspired to murder everyone aboard the Mary Celeste. Perhaps they had lured Captain Briggs aboard their own ship under the pretense of a friendly meeting, then killed him, his family, and his crew, and thrown their bodies into the sea. They could have then staged the scene on the Mary Celeste to look like an abandonment before bringing her into port to claim their prize. It was a monstrous accusation, and there was not a single shred of concrete evidence to support it. The crews of both ships were known to be reputable. Captain Morehouse was as respected as Captain Briggs. Furthermore, the timeline made the theory problematic. The Dei Gratia had left New York 8 days after the Mary Celeste and was a slower ship. For it to have caught up with the Mary Celeste staged a massacre, and then sailed on to the discovery point would have required an almost impossible combination of speed, weather, and diabolical planning. But Solly Flood was undeterred. He subjected Morehouse and his crew to grueling interrogations, treating them not as rescuers, but as prime suspects in a capital crime. Their logbooks were scrutinized, their testimonies picked apart, their integrity questioned at every turn. It was a harrowing ordeal for men who believed they had done a brave and noble thing. When his theory of a conspiracy by the Dei Gratia crew failed to gain traction for lack of evidence, Solly Flood turned his suspicious gaze inward to the ghosts of the Mary Celeste crew themselves. He developed a mutiny theory. This theory centered on the ship's cargo, the 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol. He pointed to the fact that 9 of these barrels were found empty. He concocted a lurid tale. The crew, forbidden from drinking liquor by the teetotaling captain, Briggs, had broached the cargo and begun drinking the industrial alcohol. Driven mad by the poisonous substance, they had risen up in a drunken frenzy. He imagined a terrifying scene, the crew transformed into beasts, murdering Captain Briggs, his wife, Sarah, and their little daughter, Sophia. In this scenario, the bloodstains and axe marks were the remnants of this slaughter. The first mate, Albert Richardson, who stood with the captain, would have been killed as well. Then, in a moment of horrifying, drunken clarity, the crew realized what they had done. Panicked and sobered by their crime, they had fled in the lifeboat, hoping to disappear and escape justice, only to be lost at sea. This theory, too, was riddled with holes. Firstly, the cargo was not drinkable spirits. Denatured alcohol is a harsh industrial chemical mixed with methanol or other substances to make it poisonous and unpalatable. Experienced sailors would have known this. To suggest that the entire professional crew would choose to drink poison is a stretch. Furthermore, there was no sign of a struggle. The captain's cabin was orderly. The crew's quarters were undisturbed. If a drunken, violent mutiny had occurred, the ship would have been in a state of chaos. And why would mutineers, having seized the ship, immediately abandon it? And why would they leave behind their money and all their valuable possessions? The mutiny theory, like the murder for salvage theory, raised more questions than it answered. The salvage hearings dragged on for 3 months, a cloud of suspicion hanging heavy in the Gibraltar courtroom. In the end, Solly Flood could not prove any of his dark theories. There was simply no evidence of foul play. The court was forced to rule out both murder and mutiny, but the damage was done. The judge, Sir James Cochrane, while awarding the crew of the Dei Gratia their salvage fee, made his lingering suspicions clear. The total value of the ship and cargo was around $46,000. A typical salvage award would have been half, or at least a third, of that value. The court awarded Captain Morehouse and his crew a paltry £1,700, roughly 1/6 of the total value. It was a financial slap in the face, a clear message that the court still believed something was not right with their story. The men who found the Mary Celeste left Gibraltar not as celebrated heroes, but as men with a permanent shadow cast upon their reputations. They had their money, but they had lost their good names in the court of public opinion, thanks to the relentless and unfounded suspicions of Frederick Solly Flood, with the official inquiry concluding in a fog of uncertainty. The story of the Mary Celeste was released into the wild, a perfect unsolved puzzle for the public to ponder. The ship itself, now infamous, seemed cursed. It was sold and resold, passing through 17 different owners in the years that followed. It was a bad luck ship, a pariah of the seas. Captains lost money on her. Cargoes were ruined. Sailors, a superstitious breed, whispered that the ghosts of the Briggs family still walked her decks. No one wanted to sign on for a voyage on the ghost ship. Her final chapter was as grim and unfortunate as her beginning. In 1885, her last owner, a Captain G.C. Parker, deliberately ran her aground on a reef in Haiti in an attempt to commit insurance fraud. He loaded the ship with a worthless cargo of old boots and cat food, insured it for a massive sum, and then wrecked it. But even in her death, the Mary Celeste seemed to resist a simple end. The ship didn't sink as planned. It became stuck on the reef, and the subsequent investigation easily exposed the fraud. Captain Parker was arrested, and the ship that had begun its life with the death of its first captain ended its life as a monument to a cheap crime. The timbers of the Mary Celeste were left to be broken apart by the Haitian waves, a final, sad resting place for a vessel that carried the weight of the world's greatest maritime mystery. But the story was far from over. It was about to be reborn, transformed from a historical puzzle into a modern legend. This transformation can be credited largely to one man, a young British doctor and aspiring writer named Arthur Conan Doyle, in 1884, years before he would create his famous detective, Sherlock Holmes. Doyle anonymously published a short story in the prestigious Cornhill magazine. It was titled J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement, and it purported to be the testimony of a survivor from a ghost ship. The ship in his story was called the Mary Celeste. This slight change in the name, from Mary to Marie, would stick, and to this day, many people incorrectly refer to the ship by the fictional name Doyle gave it. Doyle's story was a work of pure fiction, a thrilling and lurid tale of murder and revenge on the high seas. In his version, the ship was taken over by a passenger, a fanatical and vengeful man of mixed race named Septimius Goring, who, with the help of several accomplices among the crew, systematically murders the captain and the other loyal sailors. In order to claim the ship, the narrator, Jeffson, is spared because he possesses a magical charm. The story was a sensation because it was published anonymously in a respected journal. Many readers took it to be a true account, the first-hand testimony that finally solved the mystery. Doyle's fiction became fact in the public imagination, and in creating his dramatic narrative, he invented several key details that have become irrevocably attached to the Mary Celeste legend. Despite having no basis in reality, it was Doyle who wrote of meals still warm on the galley table, of tea still steeping in the pot, of pipes still smoking on the rails. None of this was in the original report from the crew of the Dei Gratia. They found a cold galley and no signs of a recently interrupted meal. But Doyle's images were so powerful, so evocative of a sudden, almost supernatural disappearance, that they overwrote the truth. The image of the Mary Celeste as a place where time simply stopped, where people vanished in an instant from their daily activities, was born from the pen of a fiction writer. The J. Habakkuk Jeffson story cemented the Mary Celeste as the archetypal ghost ship, and for decades, the public's understanding of the event was filtered through the lens of Doyle's sensational fiction. But as the years passed, more serious researchers and historians began to peel away the layers of myth and look again at the original facts. They dismissed the wild theories of sea monsters and alien abduction that had sprung up in the fringes. They set aside the fictions of Conan Doyle, and they began to formulate theories grounded in the science of the sea and the psychology of sailors, trying to find a rational explanation for why a good captain would abandon a good ship. One of the most enduring and plausible of these theories involves a phenomenon known as a seaquake. Unlike a tsunami, which is a massive wave, a seaquake is a seismic event on the ocean floor that sends powerful shock waves up through the water. A ship passing over the epicenter of a seaquake would be subjected to a violent, terrifying shaking. The sound would be deafening, a low, grinding roar coming from the very depths of the ocean. To the crew of the Mary Celeste, it might have sounded and felt as if the ship were being torn apart from below, as if it had run aground on some phantom reef in the middle of the deep ocean. This theory elegantly explains many of the puzzle pieces. The sudden, violent shaking could have instilled a deep, primal fear in everyone on board. Captain Briggs, fearing the ship was about to break up, or that the shaking might cause his volatile cargo of alcohol to explode, might have made a swift but rational decision, a temporary, precautionary evacuation. He would have ordered the crew to launch the lifeboat, taking with them the chronometer and sextant, not because they were abandoning the ship forever, but so they could keep track of their position while they waited at a safe distance to see what would happen. He might have attached the lifeboat to the Mary Celeste with a long tow line, intending to simply trail behind the ship until the danger had passed. In this scenario, something unexpected happened. Perhaps the towline chafed and weakened by the constant motion snapped, or perhaps a sudden squall blew up, separating the small, vulnerable lifeboat from the large, sturdy brigantine. The Mary Celeste, with its sails still partially set, would have continued on its course, sailing away from them. The 10 people in the lifeboat, Captain Briggs, his wife, his baby daughter, and his 7 crewmen would have been left behind, adrift in the vast, empty ocean. Their tiny boat would have been no match for the Atlantic waves. They would have been lost, their fate sealed by a snapped rope, their final moments unrecorded, a silent tragedy played out under an open sky. A similar theory substitutes a meteorological event for a seismic one. The ship could have been struck by one or more waterspouts. A waterspout is a spinning vortex of air and water mist, a tornado over the sea. A direct hit from a powerful waterspout could account for the disheveled state of the sails and rigging, and it would have dumped an enormous amount of water onto the ship in a very short time. The 3.5 feet of water in the hold, while not catastrophic, might have flooded in very quickly, leading the crew to mistakenly believe the ship had been holed and was sinking rapidly. The terrifying noise and violent motion of the waterspout, combined with the sudden influx of water, could have easily panicked even a seasoned crew. Once again, the logical response would be a temporary evacuation to the lifeboat, with the same tragic outcome of being separated from the mother ship. Then there are theories that focus on the cargo itself. We return to those 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol. While Sollyflood's theory of a drunken mutiny is unlikely, the alcohol may hold the key in another way. One compelling modern theory suggests the possibility of a non-destructive explosion a sort of vapor pressure wave. The barrels were made of red oak, which is more porous than the white oak typically used for shipping liquids. It's possible that during the voyage, as the ship moved from the cold of New York to the warmer climate of the Azores, some of the alcohol vaporized. The pressure inside the barrels would have built up. 9 of the barrels were found to be empty, and these were made of the more porous red oak. The theory goes like this. A buildup of alcoholic vapor in the hold created a highly flammable atmosphere. A small spark, perhaps from 2 metal bands on the barrels rubbing together, could have ignited this vapor. This would not have been a massive, ship-destroying explosion, but a sudden, contained, blast-a-loud whoosh of blue flame that would have blown the main hatch cover off and then immediately subsided. To the crew on deck, it would have been terrifying. They would have heard a loud explosion from the hold, seen the hatch cover fly off, and perhaps smelled the scorching vapor. Fearing a second, much larger explosion was imminent, one that could destroy the entire ship. Captain Briggs would have had only seconds to make a decision. The only rational choice would be to get everyone off the ship as quickly as possible. Again, the lifeboat is launched. They pile in, push away from the ship they believe is a ticking time bomb, and are lost to the sea. This theory is compelling because it explains the missing lifeboat and the fear that would drive a good captain from his ship. And it neatly accounts for the 9 empty barrels and the lack of any significant scorch marks or fire damage. It was a phantom menace, a danger that seemed real but passed in an instant, leaving a sound ship behind. These rational theories, the seek wake, the waterspout, the vapor explosional, share a common, tragic thread. They all paint a picture, not of mutiny or murder, but of a responsible captain making a calculated decision in the face of what he perceived to be an imminent, catastrophic danger. In every case, the tragedy lies in a simple, cruel twist of fate: the separation of the small, helpless lifeboat from the large, safe ship. The crew of the Mary Celeste were not victims of a crime, but victims of the sea itself, and of a fatal misjudgment born of fear. They left their ship to save their lives, and in doing so, they lost them. And the ship, their empty, silent vessel, sailed on, carrying the story of their absence into legend. We have explored the theories grounded in the laws of nature, the sudden fury of a waterspout, the deep groan of a seaquake, the phantom flash of an alcohol vapor explosion. These ideas provide a logical framework, a plausible sequence of events that could lead a prudent captain to make a fatal error in judgment. They satisfy the rational mind. But the story of the Mary Celeste has never been one to be contained solely by logic. Its profound and unsettling emptiness invites more profound and unsettling explanations. Over the decades, it has become a magnet for theories that drift far from the shores of the known world, touching upon the ancient fears of the sea and the modern anxieties of the unknown. Let us first consider the oldest and most primal of maritime fears, the monster from the deep. For as long as humans have sailed the oceans, they have told stories of colossal creatures lurking in the sunless abyss. The kraken, the leviathan, the sea serpent. These were not just fairy tales. To many sailors, they were a very real and present danger, a monstrous personification of the ocean's destructive power. Could the Mary Celeste have fallen victim to such a creature? Imagine a giant squid, a true behemoth of the deep, far larger than any specimen known to science, rising from the depths. Its massive tentacles, thick as tree trunks and lined with powerful suckers, would wrap around the hull of the ship. The crew, confronted with a living nightmare torn from the pages of mythology, would be seized by a panic beyond all reason. In this scenario, the chaos would be swift and absolute. Perhaps the creature snatched a man from the deck, pulling him screaming into the waves. In their terror, the remaining crew, along with Captain Briggs and his family, would scramble for the lifeboat, their only thought to escape the monster's grasp. They might have successfully launched the boat and pushed away, only to be pursued and overturned by the enraged beast. Or perhaps one of its flailing tentacles smashed their small craft to pieces. This theory, of course, has no evidence to support it. There were no signs of a giant squid on the Mary Celeste, no massive sucker marks on the hull. No remnants of tentacles left on the deck. The ship was not damaged in a way that would suggest a struggle with a creature of immense size. And yet, the theory persists in the shadowy corners of the legend because it speaks to a deep archetypal fear. It offers a dramatic, terrifying answer to the question of what could possibly make 10 people abandon a perfectly good ship. It replaces a quiet, mundane tragedy of miscalculation with a grand, epic battle against the unknown. As the world moved into the 20th century, our monsters changed. The terrors of the deep were replaced by terrors from the sky. And so, a new set of theories was born, transplanting the mystery of the Mary Celeste into the realm of science fiction. The theory of alien abduction proposes that the ship and its crew were the subjects of an extraterrestrial encounter. Proponents of this idea paint a picture of a silent, otherworldly craft descending from the clouds over the a beam of light, a strange humming sound, and then, one by one, or perhaps all at once, the 10 people aboard the Mary Celeste were lifted from their world into another. This theory, like the sea monster theory, conveniently explains the lack of any struggle and the sudden, traceless disappearance of the people. It accounts for why a sound ship would be left behind, perfectly preserved but empty. In this narrative, the ship wasn't abandoned by its crew. The crew was taken from its ship. It has become a classic case study in UFO literature, cited as evidence of alien visitation long before the era of flying saucers and Roswell. But once again, it is a theory born of imagination, not evidence. It is a modern myth reflecting our fascination with space and the possibility of life beyond our planet. The Mary Celeste becomes a stage upon which we can play out our contemporary hopes and fears, just as 19th century sailors used it as a stage for their fears of the deep. Another popular, though geographically flawed, explanation ties the fate of the Mary Celeste to the enigma of the Bermuda Triangle. The ship has become a poster child for the strange disappearances attributed to this infamous patch of the Atlantic. The legend tells of a place where compasses spin wildly, where instruments fail, and where ships and planes vanish without a trace, victims of some strange magnetic vortex or a gateway to another dimension. The problem, of course, is that the Mary Celeste was abandoned hundreds of miles away from the traditionally defined boundaries of the Bermuda Triangle. It was found off the coast of Portugal, nowhere near the waters between Florida, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda. But in the world of legend, geography is flexible. The story of the Mary Celeste fits the pattern of the Bermuda Triangle legend so perfectly that it was simply absorbed into its mythology. The fact that the ship was found derelict for no apparent reason made it a prime example of the triangle's supposed mysterious power. It serves as a powerful reminder of how a compelling narrative can bend and reshape facts to fit its needs. The legend of the Bermuda Triangle needed a classic ghost ship, and the legend of the Mary Celeste needed a suitably mysterious home. They found each other and have been intertwined in the popular imagination ever since, despite the factual discrepancies. Let us now turn to one of the most fascinating and scientifically plausible of the unusual theories, one that lies in the strange space between natural phenomena and outright madness: ergot poisoning. Ergot is a fungus that can grow on rye and other grains, particularly in damp conditions. If this contaminated grain is milled into flour and baked into bread, those who eat it can suffer from a condition called ergotism, historically known as St. Anthony's fire. The effects are horrific. They include painful seizures, muscle spasms, and terrifying hallucinations. The afflicted might see demonic visions, feel their skin crawling, or be consumed by an overwhelming sense of paranoia and dread. Some historians have even speculated that ergot-contaminated rye bread may have been a contributing factor to the mass hysteria of the Salem witch trials. Could the crew of the Mary Celeste have been victims of ergotism? Imagine the scene. The ship's cook unknowingly bakes a batch of bread using contaminated flour. One by one, the crew, Captain Briggs, and even his wife Sarah, begin to fall ill. Their minds begin to play tricks on them. They see things that aren't there. The familiar groans of the ship's timbers become demonic whispers. The shadows in the corners of the cabins take on menacing shapes. They become convinced that the ship itself is cursed or haunted or possessed by some evil entity, gripped by a shared fungus-induced psychosis. Their flight from the ship would not seem irrational to them. It would seem like the only possible way to escape the horrors their own minds were creating. In a state of collective madness, they would pile into the lifeboat to flee the haunted vessel. Their deranged minds seeing monsters in the waves and salvation in the open sea. This theory is compelling because it provides a biological mechanism for the kind of extreme, irrational fear that would be necessary to cause such an abandonment. However, it's impossible to prove. There is no way to test the ship's long-vanished food supplies, and it remains a tantalizing but ultimately speculative possibility. These theories, from sea monsters to aliens to poisoned bread, are all part of the rich, tangled tapestry of the Mary Celeste legend. They demonstrate our deep human need to fill a vacuum. An unsolved mystery is like a blank canvas, and we are compelled to paint something on it. Whether the picture is logical or fantastical, but the true legacy of the Mary Celeste is not found in any single theory, rational or otherwise. Its power endures because it is the perfect mystery. It is the maritime equivalent of a locked room puzzle. We have the room, the ship itself, found intact. We have the victim, the missing crew, but we have no weapon, no motive, and no culprit. The primary witness, the ship, is mute. Its silence is what allows for endless speculation. Thousands of ships have been lost at sea, vanished without a trace in storms or warfare. But those disappearances are, in a way, complete. The ship is gone, the crew is gone, and we can assume their fate. The Mary Celeste is different. The ship survived. It came back to us, a silent messenger carrying a story with the final chapter torn out. This enduring puzzle has made the Mary Celeste a cultural touchstone. Its name has become synonymous with any mysteriously empty vessel or place it has appeared. In countless books, films, songs, and even video games, it is a story that has been told and retold, each generation adding its own layer of interpretation and myth. Modern expeditions, armed with sonar and submersibles, have even tried to find the wreck of the Mary Celeste on the reef in Haiti, driven by the hope that some physical clue overlooked for more than a century might still be found among its scattered timbers. The search for an answer, it seems, is as unsinkable as the legend itself. And so, as the fire burns low and the shadows in the room grow long, let us bring our thoughts back to where we began. Let us strip away the legends, the theories, and the speculations, and remember the quiet human heart of this story. The mystery of the Mary Celeste is not ultimately about a ship. It is about people. It is about Captain Benjamin Briggs, a good and pious man, a husband and father who invested his life's savings and his family's future in that vessel. It is about his wife, Sarah, who brought her sewing machine and her harmonium aboard, trying to carve out a small pocket of domesticity on the vast, lonely ocean. It is about their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, a child whose toys were found scattered on her bunk, a silent testament to a life just beginning. And it is about the 7 men of the crew, professionals who entrusted their lives to their captain and his ship. But perhaps the most poignant figure in this entire tragedy is the one who was not there at all, Arthur Briggs, the 7-year-old son left behind in the care of his grandmother. He waved goodbye to his family on a New York pier, a small boy full of the certainty that they would return, but they never did. He grew up in the shadow of their disappearance. He would have read the newspaper accounts, the sensational stories of mutiny and murder. He would have heard the wild theories of sea monsters and ghosts. He lived his entire life with the world's most famous unsolved mystery as his own personal, intimate family tragedy. He became a man, grew old, and died, never knowing for certain what happened to his father, his mother, and his baby sister in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. His long, quiet wait, the unanswered question that must have haunted every day of his life, is the true, lingering ghost of the Mary Celeste in the end. Maybe the most peaceful way to approach this story as you prepare for sleep is to accept the mystery, to let it be what it is, a quiet, sorrowful question mark hanging over the ocean of history. The 10 souls who left the Mary Celeste were lost to the sea, a fate shared by countless mariners throughout time. Their story is unique only in the strange, silent artifact they left behind. The ship itself became their unintended memorial, a floating tombstone that tells us not how they died, but only that they lived. And so we leave them there, in the quiet of the past, adrift in a small lifeboat under a wide and indifferent sky. We can't know their final thoughts or their final fears. We can only know that they were gone. The sea holds their secret, and the sea does not speak. Let the gentle crackle of the fire be a soft farewell, a final, peaceful tribute to the lost crew of the Mary Celeste. Let the mystery dissolve into the quiet of the night, and let your own journey drift into the peaceful, silent waters of sleep. The fire is burning low. The story is at its end. Sleep well.